23 and 24. And I Rode a Horse of Milk White Jade by Diane Lee Wilson. A goby. That's what it's called. 23. No one had told me how far it was to Khan Balik. Thoughts of bad luck and my grandmother's death had to be pushed aside as I struggled just to survive each long day. The land around us was changing. We had left the mountains at our backs, and the grassy steppes once again sprawled in great rolling waves in every direction, much like my homeland. Yet more and more often, Bayan's hooves clip-clopped across hard spots of bare earth, littered with blowing sand and jutting rocks. We had fallen upon a caravan route, its faint and many-fingered path worn into the dirt by hundreds of years and thousands of feet. I rode openly as a girl now, and although this was quite uncommon, I felt fairly safe. My people always welcomed strangers, and it was widely boasted at the time that a young woman, if she had wanted, could walk across the lands of Kublai Khan carrying a pot of gold on her head and not be bothered. But that didn't stop people from staring. About every other day, our trio rode up on a small, mud-walled shelter, usually near water rising from a well or spring. These dwellings served as arrow stations, with 10 or 12 scrawny replacement horses always hobbled nearby. Caravans traveling between markets also stopped to water their animals and exchange news with the station's keeper. I was grateful when a box of mud rose into view, quite quiet and empty, for this meant I could water Bayan, fill my pouch, and ride on without explanation. When a caravan was resting, camels and oxen kneeling like so many hairy hillhawks upon the step, my arrival would cause a great waving of arms and shouted invitations to sit. A girl riding alone and carrying a cat, they figured, must also be carrying a story, and the drivers and their families always hungered for stories. I spoke shyly, answering questions as they were asked. The men and some of the women snorted at my talk of riding straight into Kublai Khan's royal courtyard. You should stay within your gear with a husband, the father scolded, or at least with a family, the women chided. But in the dust-filled eyes of some of the women, especially the girls, I saw a small spark of envy. Of course, I did not tell everything, especially not about Bayan sometimes talking to me, or about the dreams that had been troubling me. Almost nightly since leaving the mountain, my sleep had been broken by the ghostly images of white horses, their faces contorted in silent laughter. I'd begun to dread the daily sinking of the sun, for I did not understand what I had done to bring such torment upon myself. With each day's travel southward, the steppe withered. The grasses dwindled to a few gray-green weeds choking between cracked plates of baked earth. The air hung motionless and hot, and no matter how steadily we trod toward it, the horizon seemed to hover, shimmering, ever out of reach. So this was a goby. Okay, and goby is defined in the back. An area of hard soil strewn with gravel and sparse vegetation. So not very lush. Although the ground stretched flat ahead of us, inviting speed, I could not cross it any faster than if it had been mountains, for the injuries I had suffered were still healing. Any gait more than a walk, gait is like the way you walk, like kind of your pattern of walking, remained unbearably painful. Yet while I sensed my own body healing, I watched Bayan's body grow stiffer and weaker with each day's trek. When we would finally halt at mid-morning to wait out the sun's heat, the old mare would drop to her knees as soon as I unsaddled her. She would settle there all day, not even rising to graze, though her ears pricked steadily southward. Gradually, heat and exhaustion would coax her muzzle downward as she drowsed into the shadows of her neck, and she would rest. Worry ate at me. Steppe horses are known for their sturdy nature, able to live through the hardest conditions on little food. But looking around, I saw the goby held hardly anything at all for Bayan. Her teeth had to strip bark from tiny leaved bushes, and her sharp hooves had to unearth pale bulbs. With each day, her hide stretched more tightly across jutting wither and hip. Water, too, became scarce, especially when we didn't come upon an arrow station before we stopped for the heat of the day. In the early morning hours, I tried very hard to smell water as I head on my way from Karakoram, but with the goby's dust coating my eyes, nose, and throat, I could smell nothing. So I trusted Bayan to find water, urging her with a free rein and repeating the word Usan, Usan, but even her senses seemed dulled. I don't know what Usan is. Water. Luckily, before long, my eyes grew well attuned to spotting wild camels and kulans from afar. Okay, and kulans are a wild donkey. And following them at a safe distance, for this was springtime, and the bulls and the stallions were territorial to watering holes. Little more than muddy ponds, they grew thick with yellow rushes and rippled with the splashes of wading birds and black-headed ducks. Invariably, the water was warm and lay stale upon the tongue, yet the three of us bent our heads and drank gratefully. Then we retreated a distance and collapsed beneath the blistering sun. Bader always stretched, eyes closed and pink tongue fluttering, in the speckled shelter of some small bush. I hid my face within the hot shade offered by the upturned saddle and tried not to think about the rivulets of sweat running down my neck, under my armpits, between my legs. The padded winter dell of my stepbrother, lined with sheepskin, sagged heavily upon my damp body. I welcomed its thickness in the night's piercing cold, but in the day, how I longed to strip it from my body. We passed the day then half waking, just waiting and waiting for an end to the burning heat. In the vast goby, it was too hot to move, too hot to eat, too hot to even think. Not until after the sun had dropped below the horizon were we able to sleep comfortably. We awoke to the cool light of the moon probing our eyelids and the chill night air brushing our cheeks. Always I took immediate notice of the moon, whether it was shrinking or swelling, for in the past 2 months I had begun to feel its pull upon my own body. With a long groan, Bayon would lunge stiffly to her feet, shake off the dust, and, nose to the ground, wander off in search of grazing. My worried eyes followed her into the darkness. Bader worried me too, for each night he seemed to leap to his feet with added restlessness. Instead of curling beside me, round eyes intently watching as I sparked a fire with my steel, the little cat took to pacing in wide circles, crying to the moon. The wailing grew fainter as the circles grew larger. One night after Bader had left the fire, I heard a feline scream in the distance that chased tight bumps up my arms. I stood, holding my breath, but then nothing more. A short while later, though, I looked up to see 2 round yellow eyes watching me, and the next instant a smaller pair of yellow-green eyes stared across the fire. Unmoving, the animals watched each other for a long time, neither making a sound. Then the one with the yellow-green eyes edged closer to the fire. It was Bader. He came slinking, his fur stiff upon his back, to sit, tail switching beside me. When I looked up, the other animal was gone. My one daily meal was taken after dark and began with tea boiled in the small iron cooking pot Eckincorlo had given me. When I had drunk the tea, I would dig through the pouch and toss into the pot any bits of meat I had been kindly handed by other travelers. When my hands came up empty one evening, my stomach growled in instant complaint. Bader had always been good about sharing his catches, but game was scarce as grass in the Gobi, resulting in only 2 gray-green lizards, which I had with a grimace thrown back to the waiting cat. And so that night I caught, cooked, and ate my first fish, though my tongue still twists in the memory. Pulling from the pouch the fish hook and line Eckincorlo had given me, I snatched a large moth that had been flitting in and out of the firelight and pressed its fluttering body onto the prong. Then I marched down to the moonlit pond, and after rippling its surface with my bait for just a few moments, yanked a small fish flopping onto the shore. I dug out the fish's purple and orange insides with my knife and threw what was left of it into the pot of boiling water. The cooked flesh was mushy and tasteless, but my stomach stopped growling, and I rested beside the fire, rather proud of my newfound skill. I always ended up fingering the wax-sealed knot tying the Khan's bags and wondering what they hid. I thought I could feel sharp points of dried grasses poking at the goatskin that protected what nestled inside. Porcelain tea bowls like the ones Jenma collected, gold icons for a temple, jewel-encrusted bridles and breast collars. On another night, with the cooking pot already stowed and a bright half-moon floating overhead, I was just setting the saddle upon Bayon's back when an animal's shrill squeal made me jump almost out of my skin. Spinning around, I came face to face with the head-tossing, yellow-coated body of a wild Gobi stallion. In the darkness behind him, ears pricked with interest, huddled his herd of timid mares, and among the striped legs and stiff black manes cowered several steppe ponies like Bayon. The heavy-headed stallion pawed the dirt and lifted his chalky mouth in another piercing squeal. Suddenly, teeth bared, he charged, knocking me to the ground as he bit and kicked at Bayon, trying to drive her into his herd. With the force of his attack, the saddle slid away, but the reins were wrapped around my fist, and Bayon, thus tethered to my weight, could only dance in a circle, trying to avoid the cruel blows while trying not to trample me. I scrambled to my feet. The stallion charged again, ramming Bayon with his shoulder as he tore at her neck and bellowed. It was my turn to dance out of the way, yanking on the reins to swing Bayon around behind me. The stallion shook his head angrily. Black eyes on fire, he stared right through me at Bayon. Pawing the ground, he prepared another charge. I threw up my hands, stamped my feet, and yelled with all my might. He swung away, half startled, as if seeing me for the first time. Snorting loudly, the sand-colored animal sucked in the cold air again and again, trying to decide how dangerous I might be. His side shuddered like a door flap in the wind. When one of the mares behind him nickered, he flicked an ear backward. Then, with a rumble that began deep inside him and burst forth in a chilling scream, the wild stallion charged again. His side shuddered like a door flap in the wind. When one of the mares behind him nickered, he flicked an ear backward. Then, with a rumble that began deep inside him and burst forth in a chilling scream, the wild stallion charged again. His weight pinned me against Bayon's shoulder until she stumbled backward. I felt the reins ripped from my hands as I slipped to the ground, the air knocked from my chest. In an instant, hundreds of hooves were pounding the earth, stirring up a pale dust that hung in the air like a choking fog. Gradually, the thunder faded and the silence of the night closed in around me. My fingers pulled at the sand, but the grain sifted through them and fell away. Blindly, I stared upward, head throbbing, my addled brain screaming at my body to do something, do something. Gradually, I became aware of my trembling arms lifting my weight from the dirt. Yet I remained slumped against one arm, gasping for air and shaking all over. A terror I kept trying to push aside, being stranded alone and on foot in this Gobi, clamped down upon my mind like a dog's teeth upon the neck of its kill. Here's another simile, right? Like a dog's teeth. My ears caught the sound of the galloping hooves again. Groggily, I scrambled to my feet. There weren't as many this time. I could not see a thing in the dust-filled air, but I could tell the hooves were headed my way. I had no place to run. Then, like a spirit careering out of the afterlife, the white body of a horse crashed through the silty fog and came to a halt at my side. Bayon! She was back. Panting heavily, my white mare kept rolling her eyes nervously as she pranced fitfully in tight circles around me. She kept looking into the darkness. We both listened, but caught no echoing sound of hooves. I rested a hand upon Bayon's withers, wet with stallion bites, and stroked her neck, trying to calm her. I tipped my head into the darkness for just another breath or two before deciding we had better use this chance to escape. It was a struggle to fasten the saddle upon Bayon's shifting back, but I managed to tighten it, then to lift Khan's bags across the seat, though they thumped against the mare's sides as she continued pacing restlessly around me. I hadn't seen any bloody wounds from her attack, but I did notice that one of her reins had been torn from the bit. Ripping 3 strips of silk from the belt around my waist, I quickly braided them into a strong cord and tied one end to the bit. Then I climbed into the saddle, Bayon practically bolting from beneath me in a lunge toward the Bayon practically bolting from beneath me in a lunge toward the south's shadowy horizon. Bader, I called as we trotted off. Bader! From out of the cloudy night leaped a tiger-striped bundle of fur, claws digging painfully into my trousers for a hold. The terrified look on his face must have mirrored my own. I reached down to scoop up the panting cat, pulling him securely into my lap. Then I gave bay on her head. The 3 of us were off. I think by giving her her head, I'm not exactly sure what that means. I think like she's allowed to take the lead, maybe. With a groan, long and low, the stiff-boned woman struggled to her feet. Leaning against the splintered stable wall for a breath to gain her balance, she saw the look of alarm flash across her granddaughter's face. Do not worry yourself. Both your mare and I are fine. She limped to the short distance to where the white head stretched from a quivering neck. Bending ever so slowly, the woman placed her gnarled hand upon the flat brow. She listened. Then, still in the silence, she tapped the jade pendant knotted around the mare's throat once, twice, and stepped past the white belly, rising and falling in straining rhythm. Echoing her earlier groan, the old woman sank into the dried grasses. I have no idea how Bayon got away from the Gobi station that night, she was saying as her hands smoothed the trembling flank. But every evening after that, I remembered to paint blood upon her forehead before she moved off to graze for protection, she finished. The age-darkened hands lifted the silky white tail hairs and began nimbly braiding. What are you doing? Asked the girl sitting upon her knees. Are you sure she's all right? Yes, yes, soothed the wise voice. The time is coming. Be still and listen. Okay, and now we're on chapter 24, which is called Ice Fire, Earth Serpents, and the Jade Green Eyes. When we had plotted the Gobi a long time, the land changed again. The sandy, gravelly earth gave way to rolling green hills that splashed skyward into distant blue mountains. Our path twisted through them. The instant we leaned our backs into the climb, shadows, cool and wet, began fingering our shoulders, and fitful breezes whispered imperfect directions. As firmly as the hairs rose upon my arms, I knew we had entered a strange place. The land's dangers tested our courage one dusty evening when a thick fog crept silently behind us, then billowed past, hiding the narrow path. Bayon, Bader, and I were forced to doze in our tracks, huddled hard beside a cold mountain wall. All through that blinded night, I clutched a rocky crevice with one hand, my lucky gold ornament with the other. So fearful was I of falling over into the dark chasm below. But when we woke, such a sight! Every rocky dimple, every peeling twig, every tiny leaf had been painted a glittering silver, and towering directly above us in the sparkling morning air was a magnificent white palace, roof upon roof, swooping across the sky like the upturned wings of so many birds. We had truly entered a magical land, I remember thinking, for only a god could have built upon the crests of mountains. At that moment, an orange sun burst between the peaks, setting flashing fire to each crystal droplet. I knew not which gods lived in these mountains, but I quickly bowed my head 9 times toward the palace, clutched the luck within my pocket close to my side, and, tugging on Bayon's reins, scurried on along the path. The few faces I began to meet also changed, becoming flatter. These persons stared at me not with the kindness of my own people, but with distrust, and then, when they realized that behind the dirty face was only a girl, with annoyance. Sign Banu, I always called politely, but they pretended not to understand me. Which direction to the Khan? I would ask, yet their mouths hung open, their eyes blinked dully. Sometimes a torrent of cackling sounds would ripple past my ears without giving up their meaning. Then we could only stare at each other until Bayon stamped an impatient hoof and we rode away. But soon I grew skilled at using my hands and eyes to make my needs understood. Even though the people I met remained grim and unsmiling, I gestured on. Pointing to the waxen knots upon the twin bags, each stamped with the royal seal, I spoke the words Kubla Khan, and with an upturned palm scanning the horizon, raised my eyebrows. Without fail, at least one person would point to a hill or a notch upon the next horizon. Nodding my thanks, I would rein Bayon into line with the outstretched finger. In this way, we continued our journey to deliver the Khan's treasure and to find my swift horse. We padded through the lush valleys, Bayon, Bader, and I, our heads now shaded by gently drooping, long-leaved trees. My eyes, and those of Bayon too, I think, looked upon the rich green grasses as heavenly fare for the horses. Yet we saw few such creatures, and the people we passed did not gallop proudly upon their horses' backs, but hunched half-naked over muddy ditches dug into the land. At day's end, we watched them shuffle behind the mud walls surrounding their dark homes, pulling in after them the caged larks that hung by each doorway. Sometimes I wanted to shout at them to get up from the ground, to climb upon the back of a horse and feel the wind ripping through their lungs. But in the end, I rode past the earth workers without speaking, only feeling a stinging sorrow for them. Hunger was gnawing at me again. The camel's milk I had been given by some traders at the Gobi's edge was long gone. I should not have been surprised that the people I passed did not offer me food or drink, for they rarely even lifted a head at my approach. In my land, one never lets a stranger pass without inviting him into one's gear. To do otherwise would be rude. But in this odd land, not once was I offered a morsel. Even when in hungry desperation I pointed to my open mouth and rubbed my stomach, I received only a grunt and a wave of a hand. To this day, I thank Tangri for my cunning cat, Bader, for each evening as I unsaddled Dayan, Bader would disappear into the darkness, almost always returning with some small furred animal hanging limply from his mouth. One day I was riding past gray earthen walls enclosing more mud homes when a woman strode toward me, cackling and pointing. I reined Bayan to a halt. Terrified, Bader leaped from the saddle and hid among the drooping fronds of a creekside tree. The woman cackled some more, her dirty finger pointing at my knee. I realized that she was pointing to one of the silver ornaments sewn into Jenma's saddle. I realized, too, that I could probably fill my stomach by making a trade. In pointing my own finger toward the silver medallion, then to her, then to my mouth, I set the woman's head to nodding vigorously. She turned back inside the mud walls, then returned carrying a small cloth sack and a large knife. Handing me the sack, which weighed in my palm as grain, the woman cut the medallion free in one stroke. We each parted happily. That evening I boiled a handful of the grain in my iron pot and discovered that the result, though sticky, bore a pleasant nutty flavor. I saddled Bayan the next morning, already looking forward to my one meal. Bader continued to hunt, and so twice I had blackened bits of meat to add to my bowl. When we had traveled 8 more days, the saddle had grown plainer, but my pouch fairly bulged with grains, fruits, and the eggs of birds. My pouch fairly bulged with grains, fruits, and the eggs of birds. To tell truth, I could not stomach the idea of swallowing the slippery yolk, so I broke the shells into the dirt and let Bader lap up the yellow ooze. We were climbing down from another string of small... I don't know how her pouch was bulging with grains, fruits, and the eggs of birds. I don't know where she got the food from. I'm not sure. We were climbing down from another string of small mountains, careful on the pebble-strewn path, when we saw the long, ragged backbone of some gigantic snake or lizard slumping across the valley below and disappearing over the backs of the distant hills. I reined Bayan to a sliding stop with my jaw dropped. Only after several blinking moments did I realize that the winding, earth-colored ridge was an endless mud wall that traveled in opposite directions farther than my eyes could see. This too must have been thrown up by the gods, for how could any man have built a wall that had no end? By late afternoon, the sun hanging low in a pink sky, Bayan, Bader, and I cautiously approached the rambling creation that rose past our heads. We could now see that the ancient wall was crumbling in many places, and that no soldiers guarded it. Still, my heart beat fast as Bayan picked a passage around the rubble, and we crossed through this eerie barrier. In the shadows of the long wall shrank another cluster of mud homes. I saw one of the earth workers slip within an open doorway that faced me, so, riding up to it, I called a greeting. A raggedly dressed girl, not much older than me, appeared in the doorframe, jostling a wailing child upon her hip. I pointed at one of the few ornaments left sewn to the saddle. Okay, so she's been passing off all those ornaments for food. That's where she's getting the food. Yet with no more than a quick scowl, the agitated mother dismissed me. I reined Bayan back to the path, but a loud hissing sound made me look over my shoulder. A frail-looking woman wrapped in lavender gray was leaning against the doorframe and motioning for me to return. Obviously curious, I circled back. When the woman remained fastened to the doorframe, I dismounted and hobbled within a respectful distance. Bader had hopped from the saddle with me, but stayed seated beside Bayan's hooves. The slender hand motioned me still closer. More than a little nervous, I moved near enough to smell the woman's oniony breath. She wasn't old, though her face looked tired, even sickly. But it was her eyes that held my attention, twin, cloudy green moons flecked with gold, and they stared into the last rays of the sun without blinking. So mesmerized was I that I did not notice the trembling hand reaching for my chest until I felt the bony fingers probing my dell. They searched for and found the jade horse pendant I wore and hidden next to my skin. Smiling secretively, the fragile woman tapped the pendant twice, then raised her hand to my head. Still she said nothing. Placing her cool, smooth palm firmly against my forehead, she turned her gaze to mine. For the several long breaths we stood face to face, I wondered what, if anything, her clouded eyes were seeing. But I had no answer. At last the woman smiled and nodded, dropping her hand. In the wavering motion of ill health, she bent over to drag several bags from behind her into the dirt outside the doorway. Her hands fluttered, urging me to take the bags. It was almost as if she had been waiting with them, knowing that I was coming. Nodding in acceptance, I clutched 2 bags in each fist and set them at my feet. Looking up then, I saw the slight woman silently pointing a finger at the leather pouch given to me by Ekin Corlo and strung across my chest. Somehow I trusted her, and also without speaking, lifted the pouch from my shoulder and opened wide its neck between us. With a whistling sound like that of a bird, the woman excitedly scooped her hands inside the pouch and pulled forth the small bags containing the dried herbs I had taken from Ekin Corlo's possession the night I buried her. One after the other, she lifted them to her nose, each deep inhalation blossoming into a radiant smile. Nodding and gesturing then, the woman seemed to be asking if she might take some of the herbs for herself. I eyed the 4 heavy bags lying at my feet and nodded in agreement. When she kept bobbing her head excitedly, I placed one hand over hers and squeezed. Immediately the woman's smile widened into a satisfied grin. Stooping over, she pulled several large pieces of silk from a pocket, spread them upon the dirt, and scooped a small handful of each herb into a square. She quickly knotted them, then dropped the silken bags back inside her pocket. You come our land, the woman's crackly words were haltingly spoken in my tongue. Danger come also, hear the mare. The complaining voice of the young mother rose above her child's wail with a last warning. Go, now! The frail woman sank into the room's shadows. Quickly I climbed into Bayon's saddle. Bader leaped onto my lap, and with eyes darting this way and that across the horizon, we rode long after the sun had set. Not until many more hills rose and fell at our backs did we stop to hide behind a curtain of drooping tree fronds. In the darkness of evening and the tree shadows, I peered into the sacks offered by the cloudy-eyed woman and found, mostly through touch and smell, some of the favorite foods of my homeland. Arul, which is a hard yellow cheese made from the milk of camels, goats, or sheep, dried mutton, powdered mare's milk, and a block of tea leaves. Yet so nervous was my stomach that I could only hold a salty piece of arul upon my tongue and lie, ears crooked for danger, until I fell asleep. The muffled sound of gentle rain awakened me. At my first stirring, Bader meowed sleepily and pushed his feet against my stomach in protest. Rolling over anyway, I saw that Bayan was still kneeling within the tree's thick shelter. Through her black eyes, looked at me with alert interest. Remembering the danger that followed us, I set about saddling Bayan so that we could be on our way. Bader pouted and switched his tail. The muffled sound of gentle rain awakened me. At my first stirring, Bader meowed sleepily and pushed his feet against my stomach in protest. Rolling over anyway, I saw that Bayan was still kneeling within the tree's thick shelter, though her black eyes looked at me with alert interest. Remembering the danger that followed us, I set upon saddling Bayan so that we could be on our way. Bader pouted and switched his tail. The fine, continuous rain followed us all morning as we rode past first one and then another cluster of mud-walled homes, their occupants already outside and bending over the endless rows of black ditches. Close to midday, however, a wind blew from the west, chasing away the clouds to reveal a clear sky, the deep blue of sapphires. It was with the sun shining upon a freshly scrubbed land, neatly embroidered into great squares of yellow and green and black, that we came upon another one of God's wonders. At the bank of a wide, slow-moving river, our path leaped into the air and landed upon the other side in a great arching of gleaming white stone. Enormous slabs, carved and smoothed, rested upon gigantic columns that rose magically from the murky brown water. People from both directions were indifferently lifting their heads from the land and walking confidently upon these slabs suspended high above the river. Bayan snorted and lowered her head. I did not know whether to urge her on or rein her back. Tentatively, she placed a hoof upon the rock pathway. It didn't slip off. She placed another hoof upon the slab and snorted again. Then another hoof and another, and we were walking through the air. My heart was thundering in my ears so loudly that I never heard them coming. With both hands, I was clutching the arching front of the saddle, fearful that I would tumble off and into the river below, and fervently staring at the solid ground ahead. Bader was hunkered almost flat against my lap, hiding his face in my dell. With one cautious step after another, Bayan crossed over the river and kept us all dry. The instant she set a hoof upon the opposite bank, though, a man's stern voice spoke in the tongue of my people. "What are you carrying?" Stunned, I looked up to see a soldier splendidly dressed in black, mounted upon a fine dark horse, outfitted with a bread bridle and blanket. I began to smile, but the man's hard face, lined with the cracked boulders of the mountains we had passed through, chased it away. I sat tall. "I'm a messenger of the Khan," I said proudly, pointing to the seals upon the backs. "Show me your piazza," the soldier commanded. My face flushed hot. I looked down at my hands. "I lost it," I lied. "You are a thief," the man shouted. "You must come with us." In an instant, soldiers, all dressed in black and riding black horses, swept around us like a torrent of rushing water, crowding Bayan tightly. She pinned back her ears and snapped at a bold gelding that likewise flattened his ears and shook his head angrily. Another horse reached out to bite Bayan's flank. She squealed and arched her back to kick, but the wave was rolling forward, carrying us with it. We galloped, pulled deeper and deeper into this strange land as helplessly as a pale leaf in a muddy current. And that's the end of chapter 24. So 23 and 24.